Hello and welcome back to X's and O's. As always, I'm one of your co-hosts, Peter Borkowski, joined by our other co-host and my dog's barking, Mr. Bubba Hayes. Bubba, how are we doing this Wednesday? Yeah, Wednesday evening.
Pretty good, Peter. How about you?
Oh, business as usual. Back here to record another episode, and we got an actual topic to talk about this episode. Kind of a down, dead season right now in sports. NBA, NHL playoffs are over, free agency moves. The big ones have happened. Um, Baseball's still rolling around, but we just talked about that. Football's going to be heating up though pretty soon. But we're not talking about any of that today. Today we're talking about two topics kind of dominating the sports world as of late, I would say.
Mhm.
You know what they are. We're gonna do a half for each of them. So, Bubba, I'm gonna let you kind of spearheaded the topic. So, which one of our two do we want to start off with here?
You want to start with college sports and kind of NIL stuff?
Yeah, we can do that. So, yep, one of our topics, kind of the advent of NIL and money making in college sports. NIL passed in 21, I believe it was. So about 5 years in now. Of course, that gives the athletes the ability to seek out advertising and use their name, image, and likeness to profit, make some money. The other side of it is that gives the schools more ways to pay their athletes other than
Hmm.
scholarships. Revenue sharing is a big part of that. Schools, issuing part of their budget out to the athletes. So, like I said, you kind of picked the topic. So, I don't know, where do you want to start with this one?
Yeah. Well, I think most of the people probably listening and watching are probably already pretty familiar with how the NIL process works and stuff. So I guess sort of one of the bigger conversations going on right now is, does there need to be more reform? Like, we've seen the NIL kind of rules come out, and everyone's kind of adjusted to that really rapidly if you think about it. I mean, it's already changed most of the landscapes for a lot of these sports really quickly, in just a few years, and now there's conversations about ways to change that. But maybe just kind of curious how we both kind of feel about those kind of recent changes, and maybe what some of the things that are being talked about, because obviously, it affects, the teams, but it's already made a big change. If you just saw, recently, I think the reason why, Division One is going to 5 years is in part because of NIL. And maybe some people have said the writing's been on the wall for a while, but that's a pretty seismic shift that they had resisted doing forever until now.
Yeah, my thing with NIL, and I'll separate that from revenue sharing because I
Hmm.
think those are two pretty distinct. I'm all in favor of NIL in
Hmm.
terms of the advertisement side. Like, I think it's good that these athletes have the ability to go out, talk to companies, brands, whoever it may be, and make some ad money off of it. Um, Especially those higher end athletes in the upper echelons of Division One. Because I'll talk about the mid-major experience too in a
Yeah.
bit, but like those guys and girls, though obviously just due to the nature of football and men's
Hmm.
basketball, it's mostly the guys who are the big money makers. Um, but for the women too, like I think that they should be allowed to go out and if they are these prime time stars who are
Hmm.
talked about on ESPN all the time, just even outside of their college world, giving them a chance to go out and use their fame to make some money. I think that's good. Um, I think all that's good. I think where there should be some reform is how the schools approach paying these athletes.
Yeah.
Because I think that's where we're seeing the biggest issues. And again, I'm all for athletes getting paid, college athletes getting paid, especially when they're in charge of bringing money in, basically,
Hmm.
which those top tier football and basketball guys sure are. Um, if there's any reform I'm looking to see, it's putting a cap on it somehow.
Yeah.
They won't call it a salary cap, but something of that nature of, all right, you guys have $50 million to use on your team. Like,
Yeah.
go accordingly. Because what we're seeing is obviously those big boy programs, your Big Tens, your SECs, they're just getting everybody.
Yeah.
I think, the one that really jumps to mind is Texas Tech. I
Yeah.
think it's been pretty well documented how much money they give out to their athletes. And so, yeah, you have this ripple effect of, and it was always kind of this way to begin with, but especially now where those top dogs just continue to get fatter. Um,
Yeah.
and it makes it so those lesser, I mean, I think one of the more interesting storylines from this last year of college football that wasn't talked about with Indiana was, Indiana's not a blue blood in football by any means.
Mhm.
So it was kind of interesting that they were able to break through that and beat out those Michigans, those Alabamas, those Ohio States who they can just shell the money out.
Yeah. Um, uh, I think you bring up an interesting point, and it's one that obviously a lot of people kind of agree with. I mean, for me, my main question about, you know, a salary cap basically is how exactly that would work because to start with, like obviously right now the schools are not directly paying the athletes. Like they're kind of, getting the local businesses or boosters to kind
Let's
of,
say it's through boosters, yeah.
to do this. But in the future it could be paid directly by the school. That's been discussed as well. Um, I think what's interesting about the salary cap is that the NCAA and the schools kind of want to have it both ways. They are kind of pushing towards this sort of cap, but they also, by doing so, are tacitly acknowledging that the athletes are employees of a certain extent, like just as all the other major sports leagues are, which is not something that they are willing to admit.
Right.
So that is, that admission is kind of pretty damning in terms of changing the actual case of what they're being described as. I'm not necessarily opposed to a cap, but you know I guess the question is just where do you draw the line? Because at a certain point, like if you do a cap, like it is going to limit the money that is going to the athletes. I mean, because that's really all that's being limited, and it could just end up being a situation where still it's just the top athletes that are getting the most money, and some of the ones that are maybe really good players but aren't as decorated as the stars, I guess you could say, are not really getting their fair share. And I do think it's interesting too. Obviously, we've seen this kind of especially show up in the NCAA tournament, March Madness, is there's just a bigger separation now between kind of the Power Four, Power Five schools and those that are not. And some people said that's really, a bad thing. Honestly, I don't really care so much about it because yes, it's true. Like the Power Four schools and maybe a couple exceptions, just because of the alumni they have and the boosters and the local businesses, like yes, they're going to have more money to funnel into these, deals. But I think there is still sort of a natural progression to it. It just makes sense to me that you have, yes, there's a lot of schools in D1, I think over like 230 of them, but there are some that are better and there are some that may be D1, but they're not considered on the same level. So it doesn't really bother me that you see this gap widening. If anything, I think it makes sense that you see this happening where, okay, maybe you start off at a mid-major and you slowly work your way up and you're able to get, kind of a payday in the process of doing so. So for me, I don't really have a problem with some of those things. I think the biggest issue is just how it's rapidly impacted the way the sport has been played and the recruiting process and all that in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think, oh, hello, dog. Yes, hi. No, open my door. I think where I get frustrated about it, especially at the mid-major level, is when it purely is a money game.
Yeah,
Like you said, the kind of traditional path of, okay, starting at a mid-major, I'm going to work my way up to a P4, P5 school. I think that's fine. Like that's kind of what it's for.
yeah,
Not that I'm saying mid majors are just, minor league teams basically for
no,
these
but
upper teams, but that's kind of the nature of it is
yeah,
you start at a JUCO maybe, you go to a mid major for a year or two, you light it up, and then you get a big shot at a P4, P5 school, and that's fine. Where I get frustrated is when you see these bidding wars he's on the bed, between mid majors. You know, so Illinois, we had a men's basketball player this last year who had a fine season. I wouldn't say it was a great season by any means. And he asked for a ridiculous amount of money. School said no. And he ended up going to Buffalo, which is another mid-major. So,
yeah,
it's stuff like that where, these guys aren't guys or girls. They're not even moving up necessarily. They're just going where there's more money. Is he going to play
yeah,
better? Is Buffalo going to have a better season than Southern this year? Maybe. I don't know. But it's not going to be, it's not like he's jumping to Duke
yeah,
or BYU, which another Southern player did a few years ago. Um, and I think it also, I think the other issue it brings up is kind of the how I don't know if out of control is the right word, but just how crazy the transfer portal is now. I
yeah, yeah,
mean, transfer portal was always there, obviously. It's
yeah,
not, it didn't come along with NIL and money and all that, but you're seeing players play for 4 or 5 schools in 4 or 5 years.
yeah,
And that's where I'm like a little bit of, okay, something's up here. Because,
yeah,
again, I'm all for player anatomy if I like having the option to transfer because, I know athletes who have been in shitty situations and they
yeah,
just want to get out of it. And whether they move up or not is irrelevant. They just want to get out of a bad situation. That's perfectly fine. But, you're seeing players, they're just making pit stops every single
yeah,
year. And that gets a little frustrating too, especially when at a certain point they're not even trying to move up. Like,
no,
they're
yeah,
going mid-major freshman year, sophomore year, they go P5, junior year, they're at another P5, senior year, they're
yeah,
at another P5. It's like, okay, and I don't know what the answer is because I mean, not that I ever thought about transferring or was anywhere near Division One, but I don't know what I would want either.
yeah,
I don't know if there are restrictions you can place on it. Like, I've thought about, well, what if you make it they have to spend X amount of years at a school before they can officially go somewhere else. But
hmm,
again, what if they're in a shitty situation and they need to get out of there? So I don't know. The portal, I'm glad it exists, but it annoys me too at certain levels.
yeah. I think it's understandable, which is why I think what the move that they just made for D1 makes a lot of sense with the 5 years, but I think it's capped at two transfers,
Hmm.
which I think makes sense. I don't know how that applies to people who don't start in Division One, but I would
Hmm.
imagine it would be the same sort of rule. But I think it makes sense that way you have, yes, you're allowing for maybe someone to change schools if they're moving up or if the fit isn't right. And maybe, that needs to happen. I think it's good that they have two allowed. But I think you're right. When you see someone playing for a different school every year, something's not right. But you're right. I mean, that is a really big part of the, athlete experiences. Listen, sometimes, a school could be really great on paper and it seems like a great fit, and then you get there and it's just not what you thought it was going to be. You're not getting the playing time you thought you were going to be. And then in that case, it sort of makes sense to transfer, and there shouldn't be anything holding you from doing so. So I do think that, it is. I think the recent changes that they've kind of rolled out in the last month or so is a really good step in the right direction. Hopefully, the other divisions kind of follow suit. It doesn't really solve the whole NIL issue, but it does. I think at least going to put a band-aid on all the issues we've seen with the transfer portal kind of being abused in the last couple of years.
The other thought I've had about transferring, and I don't know how it would work perfectly, but is if you almost have to, maybe at a certain point even, you have to present your case for why you're transferring. I
Yeah.
mean, maybe you get one or two freebies, like, all right, there's no restrictions. You want to hop in the portal, you hop in the portal. But if you want to do it a third or fourth time, whatever it may be, then I don't know how it would work exactly, but you have to
Hmm.
present your case to some kind of committee, some kind of group of, hey, this is why I want to transfer, right? Like,
Yeah.
the coach is a dick to me. Here's my evidence. I like it's just not a right fit. I'm unhappy. I
Hmm.
think that could be reasonable to you keep those people who are just hopping schools, collecting paychecks maybe,
Yeah.
and but you're still giving those people who have legitimate reasons for transferring that ability to do so. So the other interesting and revelation, whatever development is just how coaches have to approach things now.
Yeah.
Where it feels much, and it differs from coach to coach, but it does seem like a lot of coach they take on the hired gun mentality of I'm just going to go buy a new team, basically.
Yeah.
SIU's baseball team is very much like that. Over half the team every year are transfers, just guys they
Yeah.
picked up in the portal. I think this last year we had one true freshman on the roster.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm not saying that's necessarily better or worse than the traditional bring them up as recruits, train them up and
Yeah.
give them a few years. But it is interesting to see how how those coaches now have to react of I remember when Mike Malone got hired for the UNC gig.
Hmm.
Obviously Malone coming from the NBA world was his last
Yeah.
stop with the Nuggets. Um,
Right.
one of my professors at the time, she's a big UNC fan, and I don't know if she'd heard it or was talking to somebody about like just how he was going to do transitioning to the
Mhm.
college game. And whoever the source was she heard it from basically said they think he'll fit right in because it's so much like free agency.
Yeah. I can see that.
It's kind of the same thing as, being head coach of the Nuggets trying to get guys to sign with the team. Well, it's largely the same in college of I just got to go out and present my case to some transfer portal kids.
Yeah.
Um, and I do think again, I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing, but it is getting rid of that again, that traditional college, going out, finding some high school kids, finding some JUCO kids, and you bring them in, you train them up for a year or two, and then you give them the reins when they're juniors or whatever. So um, that is a little discouraging that it's going away because I think there is something to say about, sticking with the team and as sucks as it much as sucks as much as it sucks sometimes because I've been through it at the high school level. Like, yeah, no one likes waiting and sitting their turn,
Yeah.
for a year or two while you're an underclassman. But sometimes that I think that's kind of the beauty of college sports too, is
Yeah.
these guys who are bench warmers for their freshman and sophomore year. Well, here you go. Now you're a junior, you get your chance. So
Yeah.
rather than just, we're just going to go bring in another senior who, has already played for 4 years, 3 years,
Yeah.
whatever it may be.
Yeah. I mean, I think you bring up a good point is just how much it's also changed recruiting. And, I think it's actually in a lot of different levels because I think to be fair, I think whenever you're at sort of the top of your league, which let's say in the case of D1, is like the Dukes of the world in basketball or, that the Alabamas of the world in football, those coaches, yes, they have to be good recruiters, but you don't really have to, be too good of a salesman to, be the head coach at Alabama and say, hey, you're a five-star recruit. I think you should, I think you should want to play here. Like that's what a lot of kids would dream of. You don't have to really convince them. It's a little bit harder if you're at Buffalo and you're trying to convince someone to come play football there. Um, so I think at the different levels, there's a little bit more to recruiting. But I also think now you're right. Like I think coaches are a little bit more. like yes, they're going to continue to add players that are freshmen, but and I've kind of experienced this myself. Like sometimes it is easier to be like, okay, well, why don't I look in the transfer portal and see what's available because I might be able to get a player who's, a better fit for the team that route than going with a freshman that you don't really know how they're going to come and playing. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but it's definitely something that's, kind of an added convenience now that was less of a case, 10 years ago. So I do think that's interesting. It also does kind of depend on the level of your team and kind of the competition. Like if you're the cream of the crop, it's at this point it's more about who's offering the most money because, the difference between Michigan and Ohio State or, Alabama and Georgia, these types of programs, like at this point, it might just come down to money because there's not a lot that separates the programs, from a, facilities perspective or things like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it speaks to a larger thing about just how much of a business college athletics is becoming. I
Yeah.
mean, they always made money. Like, well, I say that I've seen the charts.
Yeah. A couple sports
There's
that,
only I think like 20 to 40 schools who are actually or athletic departments who are like actually profitable in the
yeah.
US. And that might be overshooting it too. It might be drastically lower, but that's my guess off the top of my head. Um, but still just the nature of, and I've seen it from the communication side of, you know, putting much more attention on selling than just, promoting and appreciating what's already there.
Yeah.
Bringing in ticket sales, like always a major push, getting these athletes deals, bringing in, high profile athletes who you're going to pay millions of dollars to.
Yeah.
Like it is so much more of a, we need to, especially at the Division 1 level, it's, we need to make money. We need to stay afloat.
Yeah.
And part of that is you need to pay athletes now. I mean,
Yeah.
that does come out of the budget somewhere. And that is another thing I wished for. And it's probably all out there, but it's not easy to see of just the transparency around all of this too, I think could be
Yeah.
better. I mean, I work in well, we both work in college athletics, and even I
Hmm.
get confused about where's this money coming from? Where's this money
Yeah.
going? Who's actually paying these athletes? Like what I think the transparency could be better, and it might not fix anything, but at least then you could easily see, all right, this person's earning 2.5 million. It's coming
Yeah.
from this source. Because athletic department schools are always going to be, they're always going to find sneaky workarounds
Yeah.
to circumvent the best they can, whatever they can to bring in those top tier athletes. So. I don't know. I think they're all good things, but I think some more, as we've seen with like the eligibility stuff, just some more guidelines would be helpful
Hmm.
to make sure things don't get too out of control and it doesn't turn into a, professional league.
Yeah.
Because outside of quality of play, which is obviously always going to be better in the pros, and the money made is always going to be, if you make it, is going to be better in the pros. Um, college athletics offers a different version of sports. Like it's,
Yeah.
seeing people stick it out for 4 years at a university or, small school versus big school, whatever it may be. Like there are certain innate things to college athletics that I think is a main reason why people love them so much. And I
Yeah.
think when you start turning it more and more into a business and it gets closer and closer to the pro league standard, you lose some of that stuff. And eventually it's just going to become you know, I think the worst case scenario is that college athletics just becomes a amateur league,
Yeah.
basically. I mean, the players are getting paid the same, not the same amount, but they're getting paid the same way, right? The way you acquire talent is the same way. It's basically free agency. Um, and that if they keep moving that way, it's going to kind of take away what makes college sports so great sometimes.
Yeah. So I think on that point, and I mean, because you and I think have pretty similar views on just NIL and the path forward, there is, of course, a lot of people probably of an older generation who will say, Listen, I mean, I really don't like the way this has changed college sports. Like the last couple years, like it's really hard to follow a team if every person on the team is different the next year. Like, yes, they're more focused on the school, their fans, so they don't really care so much about the well-being of the student athletes as much as I hate to say it, or they'll say, well, they're getting, a full ride, so do they really need to complain about not getting paid? Um, I think while we're at least sort of starting to move past, the sort of older argument of, well, they're getting paid through scholarship, because we know, as former college athletes, like there's a lot more to school when you're there than just that, because, you're there, you're practicing all the time, you have a lot of responsibilities, you know, not everyone can afford to do that for free, for an entire school year. So I think we are moving past that, but at a certain point, I do think some of those criticisms are, going to start to grow louder, and we are sort of seeing that, and it's not just the fans. Like, if you look at a lot of the older sort of coaches, like the Nick Sabans of the world, they're sort of taking it upon themselves to be, the kind of new commissioner of college sports, and going to Capitol Hill every other week to try and advocate for, new pieces of, new tools that they can use to sort of limit this from happening. I think at some point there's going to have to be some response to those claims, because I think what they're arguing is, well, maybe it's not a bad thing we've done it, but it's gone way too far, and it's entirely changed the game. So I'm just wondering what you think the kind of response to that should be, and you know, are they making a fair point, or is it just a little bit of, they're from a different generation and they maybe don't understand the challenges as they are today?
I think it's fair to say it's gone a little too far in some regards. Um, I think the biggest adverse effect of it is going to be just the pooling of talent at the top. Um,
Yeah,
that the rich get richer, basically. I think that's going to be the biggest concern about it is, what can we do so it's not just your top five teams every season. It's how is there a way we could spread it out so we could still have a couple of those kind of underdog stories come through and just balance things out, get some more parity in there, basically. Not that I think any college sport right now is suffering from parity issues. I mean, football just
yeah,
had Indiana won, Michigan won for the first time, and was it since the 90s? Basketball
yeah,
title. Oklahoma ran softball for a while, but now Texas has taken over. Baseball seems to be different every single season. So like, those big four, and women's basketball maybe it suffers from it a little bit. Though UCLA won this year, which was, not a usual, not your Connecticut or your South Carolina. Anyways, I think that's the biggest adverse thing that you have to be on the lookout for is, are we losing people along the way? I mean, is it a matter of
yeah,
these schools aren't don't want to pay their athletes this money, which, that's on the school then. If a little
yeah.
mid-major says we don't want to shell out $10 million for one guy on on the men's basketball team, okay,
Hmm.
that's on the school then. That's their philosophy.
Yeah,
But where it's going to become an issue, which we see in pro leagues, especially baseball, is like schools just saying we can't afford to. Like
yeah,
we want
exactly.
to, but we literally cannot afford to dish out this much money for
Yeah,
to to keep players or to even get players.
yeah,
And that's just going to grow that disparity, which again has always been there. Those blue bloods are blue bloods for a reason. They've always been good. It's not like Michigan or Ohio State football was ever, was bad before NIL. But they're just going to keep getting richer. So I think
yeah,
that's where the issue is. But I do think you have to concede in that kind of boomer mindset, if you will, is like things are changing too. Like
Yeah.
social media, for one, for instance, like the ability to market yourself is so much easier now than it ever was in the past, right? You
Hmm.
get shipped a box of some goods, you go on Instagram, you say, "Hey, this is whoever, I'm happy to be sponsored by." All right, that it's super easy. And you have to take that into account. Like you just like
Yeah.
that's just the landscape now. So there are ways you need to learn how to incorporate that, but yeah, keeping things under control to a level needs to also be a priority. So, um, again, I don't have as much issue with the promotion marketing NIL stuff. Like these
Yeah.
athletes, they want to go out, they want to strike up a deal with whoever, okay, great, that's on them. But I think where you really start to get some trouble spots is, all right, how much money are the schools giving these
Yeah.
players? Even if it's not technically the school, it's the school. So, um, that's where it becomes. And, last thing I'll say that the thought popped up, it depends on the athlete too. I mean, does this, I think for those kind of bench warmer, they don't get as much time. Like, I think this is great for them because they're getting what they're due
Hmm.
now before they go work a 9 to 5 for the rest of their life. Like,
Yeah.
this women's basketball player, she knows she's never going to touch the WNBA court, so she's going to earn some money now while
Hmm.
she's an athlete, and then after her career's done, she'll transition into the, public,
Yeah.
not sport life. Those athletes who they're going pro, it's like, do they need it as much? I mean, obviously you never know what happens going pro. They might
Yeah.
get torn ACL their first practice and that's that. But, still it's kind of like, well, we know Cameron Boozer's going top 3 in the NBA draft. Like, how much money are we going to give this guy now?
Yeah.
So I think that's the other factor you have to really consider is like, where are these athletes going once their career's done? And, how should they be compensated now before they move on? So,
Yeah. I think the last point on parity I'll make is I think it's fair to say that there's actually been more parity now in the last couple of years with NIL than there was before.
hmm
And the reason for that is because a lot of these, power schools have the funds or the connections to kind of pay their players. It has kind of removed a little bit of the competitive advantage that some of the really top programs had built and just, being about, I think Nick Saban in Alabama is a great example. Like Alabama, yes, is always going to be a perennial contender, a good program, but right now they're not, the class of college football, and that's because other schools can now afford to, kind of take some players that maybe would have otherwise gone to Alabama, and that's because they can pay them. And maybe, that's not a great argument as well. They're only here because they're getting paid more. But it's like, listen, I think just from a fan perspective, you are going to see some more parity because, listen, the same schools aren't going to be able to afford to pay the most money in those contracts every single year. But I think it could be a situation where every year you have different good teams, and the same team is not going to be good necessarily every single year because there's a lot more, loss of players going on. So I think it is, in that regard, and we've already seen it in college football. It has really changed the idea of parity because, yes, you're always going to have your, stronger programs, but I don't think, I don't think we're going to be in a situation anymore where there's one clear team that's, a shoo-in to win the national championship every year and they win every single game by 50 points. I don't think we're going to see that anymore in this era. I think you have, less like elite all-time teams and more just, really solid teams that, are good teams, but they are not going to win every single game because there's a lot of other really good teams as well. So I think we've actually seen more parity. It's just, the gap has gotten even bigger than from mid-major to Power Five. But within the Power Five, I think we're seeing even more parity than we really ever have in recent history.
yeah, I think that's the main point is you know, of you have those, say you have your two groups, right? You have your A tier teams, you have your B tier teams, whatever you want to call them, Power Five, mid-major, whatever. And the parity within those, the parity within that top tier has grown. Like it's, the top tier has shrunk. So yes,
Yeah.
you're those teams that were already at the top, your Alabamas in football, your Alabamas, Michigans, Ohio State, Oregon, whoever, like they're all closer together than maybe they were 10 years ago. Um, but the jump from that top group to the bottom group, like you said, I think has gotten bigger because
Yeah.
again, I've seen it at the mid-major, working in a mid-major conference after every season in every sport, it's just all right, who did we lose? Like this girl just got here. She had a great year. She's gone, right? We had that on our
Yeah.
women's basketball team, right? They come in, they play a year, they're gone out the door again. So, it's just, as someone who worked in the mid-major sector for a year and a half, like that part is discouraging to see. And, not that I think a mid-major was ever going to win a national title, but they could fight for it. They could make it a couple rounds in March Madness or maybe get a playoff win in the college football playoffs. And I just don't see that
Yeah.
happening anymore. It's going to be instead of three really elite teams and three kind of surprising mid-majors, it's just six of those P5 schools who are
Yeah.
just, they're closer to each other and a different one might win every single year, like you pointed out, which is good, but you're not going to see those mid-major teams kind of come out of nowhere and pull off a shock. So that's where I sit with all of it. So.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're out of time for this session, so we're going to take a break. And then when we come back, we'll move on to our next topic. And welcome back. Bubba and I return from our break as we get set for our next topic in today's episode, which, yeah, Bubba kind of spearheaded, but it is gambling in sports, sports gambling, betting, whatever you want to call it. So, kind of like our last topic, doesn't really need any introduction, I don't think. So, Bubba, like last time, kind of let you take us in our first direction here.
Yeah. So again, a lot of, a topic a lot of people had thoughts on. I mean, I think there's also like a lot of nuances to it as well. Um, one thing I can just say for myself is like, even though I've never been opposed to it, I'm starting to get very irritated with all the like ads. That's getting very annoying. There's honestly a lot of different directions we could take this, but I guess just kind of starting off like maybe just your general thoughts on the concept and really how it's kind of spread, at least here in Missouri, which we're both kind of familiar with over the last year or so, and maybe just kind of what we think kind of its early effect on like maybe sports and fandom, maybe more so than the sports.
Yeah, on the whole, like you said, I'm not opposed to it. Like, if that's what you want to do with your money, that's what you want to do with it. It's not illegal in many states now. I don't know how many it's still illegal in, but it's dwindling. As you said,
Mhm.
Missouri, which I don't think I've ever, yes, I have sports gambled before, not when I was an NCAA athlete. I'll make that
Yeah,
clear. Not that there's anything that could be done about it at this point. But I've done it before, but I've lived in Illinois for the last five
yeah,
years, so it's been legal there since I
yeah,
started doing it. Um, so I'm not too familiar with the Missouri side of things, but no, I think it's fine in itself. Like if that's what people want to put money on, great. If that's what gets them excited in it, great. Like it does add a little bit to games. I mean,
yeah,
I've watched, again, after my playing career was done and up in Chicago before I moved down to Carbondale, like, yeah, that was one of the better parts of waking up Sunday mornings was seeing
yeah,
if you could make some money too. Not that I ever bet big. I think the most I ever put down was like $50, but still, like that idea is still, it makes things a little more interesting, especially if it's not your
yeah,
team playing. Um, I do agree with the ads, like they are annoying.
yeah.
especially 1 second. All right, sorry about that. We'll cut that out. Um,
Hmm.
Maybe we'll see how I feel. What was I saying? No, the ads are definitely annoying, especially for like just the really minor ones. I mean, everyone's got an ad now. Like you expect it
Yeah,
out of your FanDuel, your DraftKings, like your big boys, because they're big companies. But you're seeing these little tiny ones that have no business really existing.
yeah,
And it's just like, all right, this is too much. Where it really annoys me though is when, and not everyone's doing it, but you're definitely seeing it more and more, is when broadcasts for sports incorporate it into the
yeah,
broadcast. I mean, I was watching, my roommate had it on. I wasn't watching voluntarily because I don't care, but I was watching, it was a UFL game.
hmm,
And, they came back from commercial and they're hitting you with the betting lines. They're like, all right, here's how the line has moved since the start of the game. The Premier Lacrosse League does that a lot too. It's like, all right, here's the line now. Um, that's where I get really irritated is because I'm like, this isn't part of the game. Like
yeah,
it's surrounding the game. A lot of people do it. That's if you want to do it, great. Like I said, I've done it. I've enjoyed it. I've hated it too. Like that's your prerogative, but it's like on the official broadcast, why are we getting these guys to talk about, oh, the money line has shifted up so much. It's like I don't care. Like it doesn't
yeah,
impact this game. And even if I was betting on the game they were doing it in, I still wouldn't care. So
yeah,
that's where I get really annoyed is when they try to incorporate it into the sport itself, into the
yeah,
broadcast, basically. I'm like, this is where I draw a line of like I don't need it shoved in my face by the broadcast, dude. Commercials, whatever. Your commercials are going to be whatever they
yeah,
are. But like during the actual broadcast, I don't like why are we dedicating time to this? The Cubs do it too before, in one of their pregame show segments on Marquee is talking about, oh, these are the bets I think you should make or something like that. It's like there are people for that. There are,
yeah,
betting channels and podcasts and YouTube pages and whatever. It's like I don't need, the pre-game host talking to me about, well, I think Nico
yeah,
Horner is going to get over a hit and a half tonight. It's like I
yeah,
don't. That doesn't impact me. I'm sorry, or it doesn't impact the game. It doesn't add anything to it. So I don't
yeah.
know. That's where I really get annoyed.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it does seem like, like the media and the people covering the sports that I don't know if they are more privy to maybe information than we are, but it seems like they're almost betting that that is actually going to bring them in more viewers if that is something they're covering, which I have no idea if that's true or not, but it seems, 5 years ago we didn't see people talking about that on like ESPN during a game or something like that, and now like I guess in some aspects it's not different than talking about, oh, this is, the team's win probability right now, but there is just a slightly different element to it. So I do think that's a fair point. But yeah, I think you're right. Illinois has already had it for several years now, so it's a little bit less different. Here in Missouri, I think we just kind of got it. And I mean, I voted for the amendment to legalize sports betting because I, supported it, and I don't think there's any reason for it to be illegal. But Missouri, when it passed, we got a good 6 months of just heavy every single ad. I mean, every one out of every three ads was a John Hamm sports betting ad. It was pretty
Yeah.
much that was all I saw
Well,
there
and it
for six.
wasn't it wasn't even legal at that point. How long did it
No,
take? How long did it take for it? Again, I
well,
don't,
it
I
was
don't, I don't think I've ever placed a bet in Missouri. So how
it
long?
so for the when the amendment passed in November of 24,
Right.
it didn't like start up officially until December of last year. So
Yeah.
basically, the couple months before and the couple months after, all those companies were trying to get the business off the ground here. So that's really when they've sort of started to kind of die down now, the commercials after they finish, all their initial, bonus
Yeah.
bets and all that stuff. But yeah, for a while there, it was definitely all over the place, and it was starting to get a little bit annoying. But that's just. I guess I can't really complain about commercials because does anyone really want to watch commercials to begin with, I guess. Um, there's also, kind of an aspect to it to where I don't think there's a real fear as of now that like it's going to taint in any way the actual sport being played. But of course, there have been scandals and such in the past of, you know, athletes or coaches, sort of somehow being involved or making money off of this. And obviously, like, there's a lot more guardrails to prevent that from happening now. Do you think that's a concern moving forward? I mean, obviously, we kind of saw, MLB kind of had a panic attack when the whole Shohei stuff came out, and thankfully, it seems like most of that ended up not being him directly.
Hmm.
Um, but at least that's what a lot of people would say.
Yeah, I don't know
But
about that one, pal. But
well,
anyways,
I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. But anyway, I do think that is kind of a concern, and maybe not so much the bigger games, the bigger stages, but like lower levels. Like I've seen it in some like, lower level tennis matches, like match
hmm.
fixing or even just like, you know, obviously not giving games away, but like, the spread, that sort of stuff, or the over under. Like, is that something that you think? And now that I think about it, we have actually seen it in the NBA now, a couple examples of this happening. Do you think that's something that's a concern moving forward now that this has kind of started to get bigger?
No, not any more than it was. I mean, it's way more accessible now, obviously.
Yeah.
If you have a phone and a driver's license and you're in a legal state, like you can do it. And if you're not, you can get someone else to do it. So like,
Yeah.
it's easier than ever to do it. But I mean, those issues have always been around. Pete
Yeah.
Rose's te legacy obviously tainted by it. There's the whole Michael Jordan conspiracy that they forced him to retire for 2 years because they thought he was
Mm.
gambling too much. I don't think that was on sports, but he did have a gambling issue. But anyways, no, I don't. Because it's so individual based. I mean,
Yeah.
you have what was it? I mean, it was Classe and wasn't it another Guardian too? It was two of them, right? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, you get a couple NBA guy. I mean, Chauncey Billups got arrested for it, and then
Yeah.
I forgot who the other.
Who's there's some guy on the Hawks.
I think Malik Beasley got t shafted for it, and obviously there's the whole thing in college football now with Sorsby.
Yeah.
So it happens, but I think say what you will about the big leagues, they're pretty pretty. How should I say it? Uh, I don't even know what I'm trying to say. They crack down on that stuff hard. I
Yeah.
mean, when it happened in the NBA world, Billups got arrested by the FBI. The other guy got
Yeah.
suspended. The MLB jumped on Clase and the other Cleveland player pretty damn quick. Sorsby's whole career might be ruined now because of it.
Yeah.
So like, um, I don't think it's going to become a systemic issue. I'm sure guys are going to keep doing it. I mean, I'm sure there are a ton of guys, pardon me, a ton of guys who are doing it right now that we don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so easy to, you fake a username, you get your buddy to do it, whatever it may be. Um, so I don't think it's going to be like a big, sports gambling is taking over the world or
Hmm.
taking over the sports world, but I think leagues and whatnot might be a little more aware of it just because again of how easy it is to access now.
Yeah. And do you think, just kind of on similar lines, like another thing I've noticed is like, and it makes sense, like teams stand to make money, if they're going to have partnerships. Like, I don't know if the Cubs are, but the Cardinals have a deal with Bet365, I think is their sponsor. Maybe they just have one with all baseball, but it seems like a lot of teams are kind of getting into bed with these sorts of companies. Do you think that's, a good thing, or should maybe they not be involved with the teams or the leagues? Because, some are saying like, yes, obviously most people can do it responsibly, but is it a good thing that like teams and leagues are kind of encouraging their fans to be doing this and sort of, it's one thing it's just happening on a natural level, but kind of encouraging
I
people to sometimes, because obviously, like, listen, and as with most things, like a little bit of it is fine, but it can lead to an addiction.
well,
And
yeah, and
unfortunately, it's the type that can cause people to, lose a lot of money if it gets kind of out of control.
yeah, and I don't think it's bad from that perspective. I mean, obviously, I don't, I'm not wishing anyone to get a gambling addiction, but like,
Yeah.
teams are sponsored by alcohol products. You could make the same argument there. It's like, should we, when, alcoholism's a real problem in the world, should, the name of the Cardinal Stadium be Bush? Like, I think you could say that about any product that they're advertising that isn't, 100% free of addiction, I guess.
Hmm.
Alcohol is obviously the big one that comes to mind. So
Yeah.
no, I think in that regard, it's like whatever, they're sponsored by beer companies and alcohol companies. Like gambling's, kind of the sort of same vein. Like it can be good
Yeah.
and fun and, limited doses, but obviously there is the chance you get a bigger addiction to it. I think it's more, I don't know if scummy's the right word, but just an interesting look to be sponsored by a betting company. I mean,
Yeah.
and even though these are legitimate companies, FanDuel and DraftKings, like they're not some guy in his house setting this up. Like they are legitimate companies that bring in a lot of money, um,
Hmm.
or lose a lot. I don't know the financial standing of betting companies, but it's still like, they're making their money off of the impact of the game.
Yeah.
It's like whatever happens in the game directly affects the betting market. And I'm
Hmm.
not saying I think teams are going to start colluding. Like, no, I don't think that'll happen. But still, it is an interesting look of like, this team is sponsored by a company that you can bet $1,000 on for the team's game that's actually being played. Um, I just saw it's actually closing, but I mean, the Cubs had a DraftKings bar, whatever they call it.
Hmm.
They had one in Wrigley, like right outside the stadium. So right outside Wrigley Field. Um, it's gonna happen. I mean, it is like it's the nature of things. So I don't think it's 100% a great look, but it's what's gonna happen. So
Okay. Um, and I guess this one's a little bit different, but obviously, and we did kind of mention this, like it does seem like it brings a new avenue to sports. Like at least me personally, like, you know, in the past, if you've had a bet on a game, like you're more willing to watch sports that you
mhm,
otherwise wouldn't, or watch teams or games that you otherwise wouldn't.
right.
Do you think that has the capacity to sort of bring in new fans, whether it be to a different sport or just sports in general? Or do you think that sort of argument, which admittedly, is probably a little bit overhyped? And to me, it seems like it does have that capacity, just maybe not in a large scale. What do you think?
Yes and no. I'm sure it happens, but I would be hard pressed to say like, somebody got into pickleball because they were putting money on
Yeah,
it. Like,
yeah,
I've bet on weird stuff before just for the hell of it. I've put $1 down on tennis or, European
yeah,
soccer or something just to see. I still don't watch it. Like even those games I bet on, I'm just like, we'll see. Like I'll put $1 down, maybe I'll make some money. If not, whatever. Um, I think the weird thing is like the people who are gambling most of the time on these teams are either people who are already really invested in the sport. Like, yeah, I've bet on football teams, that I don't have any connection to, but I
yeah,
still like football in general. And I know enough about football in the league to like make those bets as confidently as you could. They were usually outlandish because I was just trying to turn like $1 into 20 or something. But still, like, I'm already invested in the sport. On the other end of the spectrum, you're going to get gambling addicts,
yeah,
who they're just putting money down on anything to try and earn it back, basically.
yeah,
And so I don't think you're going to have a lot of those people in the middle who are like, well, I'm not a big baseball fan, but I'm going to bet on the game. I'm going to sit down and watch it. Like, you might sit down and watch a different game, like, if,
Yeah.
but, during NFL, during Sundays, like, yeah, I might watch a Falcons Dolphins game because I threw a little parlay on just to see if it's something would hit.
Hmm.
But I'm still enjoying football in general.
Yeah.
And, and even when I would have a bet down, and again, I don't bet regularly, I haven't bet in a while. Um, but even when I would, like, I still really wasn't watching it for the bet
Yeah.
necessarily. It was like, oh, well, I'm gonna watch the game anyways. I'm gonna,
Okay.
have some drinks with the guys, and I'll throw a couple dollars down and see if it comes out. If not, well, whatever. But and again, but that's just me as someone who doesn't really gamble. At least the
Yeah.
last couple of years when I was employed by SIU, and the rules around about athletic employees betting is really weird right now. So I didn't when I was at SIU. I had that gray period between not being an athlete and not being an official athletic
Yeah.
employee, where I could. Um, no, I mean the capacity's there. Like someone might and start watching baseball because of it, but I would struggle to believe that somebody who had no interest in
Yeah.
soccer, let's say, in MLS, suddenly becomes a MLS fan just because they like
Yeah.
betting on the games. They might bet on them and maybe they'll watch it, but they're not gonna be coming back regularly. Like, I really enjoyed watching that game when I had $50 on it. I'm just gonna keep watching now. So
Yeah.
I don't know. That's kind of where I land on that.
Yeah. I guess if anything, it could maybe just turn casual fans into more kind of involved. On a slightly different note, and I haven't heard a lot about this, but I would kind of be curious too. You don't hear a lot of athletes speak on it a lot, even though some of them are obviously involved in, the commercials and that sort of stuff. But the one thing I've seen in a lot of different sports is athletes talking about, and it's really just been in the last couple of years, the amount of like fans yelling at them and angry DMs they get from
Hmm.
people, you know, because they didn't live up to their bet or something. And like, obviously, I'm sure that's always been a thing to some extent, but in the last couple of years, and maybe this is also to do with, social media and people being able to just DM a player anytime they want, not
Hmm.
necessarily they're going to see it, but it seems like that's something that the athletes think has gotten a lot worse
Hmm.
with betting. Now it's not just the fans of your team that are watching you. It's Joe Schmo from a completely different city is mad that you got your under on the points tonight, and he's telling you to go kill yourself in your DMs. Like, I mean, we can laugh at it, and maybe like some people think it's a joke, but that is something that I've seen a lot of
Yeah,
athletes talking about, and it's not just in one single sport. Like I see it from golf to baseball,
right.
like that sort of stuff. Like the anger from fans at athletes. Like obviously, you know, if you're a fan and you place a bet, you can't be mad at an athlete if it doesn't work out. But it seems like there's just a little bit of parasocial stuff going on, and some fans maybe don't get the message. So, kind of maybe your thoughts on that, because for me, I do kind of feel for the athletes in that regard. Like, there's nothing we can really do about that,
Right.
but I mean, it's kind of stinky because there's just it just seems like it's becoming more and more prominent when, a couple years ago, sure it happened, but you didn't hear much about it.
Yeah, obviously there's a line. I mean, if you're making legitimate death threats or threats to their family, like, all right,
Mhm.
slow down, buddy. I think from the athlete point of view, like, yes, it's frustrating because like they don't give a shit. Like, if they're, if they didn't hit their over on points, they're probably going to be more disappointed that they didn't score enough than, I didn't hit my, and if they still won though, they're going to be like, well, we still won, whatever. I think that just comes with, that comes with the territory of being an athlete too. I mean, you have to, not that I've done it nearly to the level of professionals or even D1 athletes, but I
Mhm.
have experience through, and not about betting, of course, but
Yeah.
you take shit sometimes. Like
Yeah.
that's the nature of it. And yes, unfortunately, with social media, it's easier than ever to directly go after somebody. I mean,
Yeah.
I can hit up, I could hit up Alex Bregman in his DMs right now and be like, why the hell are you not doing living up to your contract, buddy? Like it's super easy.
Yeah.
I would never do that, by the way.
Yeah.
But still,
Mhm.
that's yes, it's frustrating because it's like it's another thing for fans to get upset about. I mean, now they're not just worried about, oh, you didn't win the game, you had a crappy game. Now they're worried about, oh, you just cost me $20. Like, that definitely adds to it. So it's
Yeah.
in but at the same, not at the same time, I'm not trying to give these fans, I'm not trying to defend them if they say something heinous, but that's the territory of being an athlete is like you got to learn to eat the shit sometimes.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that sometimes it's about some dumbass who put $30 on you, but it is what it is now, and it's about learning how to navigate. Well, again, kind of like I said with the NIL stuff, like it or not, this is the way things are going. It's not going anywhere. They're not going to shut it down. It's becoming more and more accessible. It's going in the
Yeah.
other direction. So this is the way the future of sports looks. It's a major part of the future of sports. And so now it's about, all right, how do we handle it? Where do we maybe make some limits? Like, where do we draw that
Mhm.
line? And, it's just weird. And again, gambling's always been around, but just the last couple of years, more and more states are legalizing it through FanDuel app and, on your phone. You don't even have to leave your couch now. You don't have to call anyone. You can just do it from your couch. Um, so again, it is kind of, I say early, even though it's been around a while, but this version of it is still kind of in that early stages of like, all right, we're seeing the problems that arise from it. How can we
Mhm.
handle those moving forward? And, unfortunately, like shitty fans are just the name of the game. Like there's always going to be some fans who are upset with you over you lost them their bet or you just didn't play that well or you cost them the game, whatever it may be. And it's how do we deal with that? Where do we draw a line? And again, it's unfortunate that thanks to social media, they're two taps away from sending you some pretty nasty shit. So
Yeah. And then kind of just lastly, and we kind of mentioned it earlier, and it's similar to the stuff with, we talked about earlier in the first segment, but every time you have some changes, of course, maybe, sometimes you have to reconsider certain things. Do you think there are any, changes that we're going to be seeing happening, just as far as like what bets are allowed and that sort of stuff? One thing I've seen it, that I think is interesting is certain states that have, kind of gone through the process are now kind of wondering if maybe prop bets or something that should continue. Obviously, like a lot of people would not be happy about that because, it adds an extra layer rather than just, who's going to win, money line, that sort of stuff or spread. But I have seen a lot of stuff about how they're a lot easier to kind of, I don't want to say, interfere with, but they do really come down to one person and the integrity of one person, especially when you're talking about, just one player. Um, is that something that you think is feasible? Is that something that you think is not really needed? That's really the main sort of, potential change I've seen is some states saying that, well, maybe these specific prop bets shouldn't be allowed to be placed.
I I don't see how that's going to change much for the better. Even if it might be the right thing to do, it's, if you can't bet on prop stuff, if you can't bet on really specific stuff, you're going to lose some people, I'm sure. I mean, but at the same time, I don't know what it would do. I mean, those
Yeah.
people who are serial gamblers, like, they're placing bets every night, they're putting big money on it, whatever it may be. If they suddenly can't bet on some guy's strikeout total, well, they're just going to bet on the game then. Like that's all it is. And the other thing, I mean, this goes for any vice, is someone will figure a way around it, or, it'll be some under the table, under the table app or website or someone like say that, at the statewide level and for the big companies like FanDuel, like DraftKings, you say, all right, no more prop bets. You really think that there isn't going to be some shady
Mhm.
whatever out there who's like, well, we're still going to do it. Like, even if it's illegal, we're going to do it under the table. Like, yeah, of course they are. I think they would. So it's one of those things of like, well, let's at least try to regulate it instead of just getting rid of it and letting all these kind of scummy groups, people, whatever it may be, find workarounds around it that might just lead to more trouble. So I wouldn't see again, even if you think it's the right thing to do, and maybe it is, I don't see the massive advantage of doing it. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't think it'll slow down gamblers. It might be an uptick in more shady sites. I think it would just be a bigger headache than it's worth of maybe trying to find some control, but at the same time, it's like, how do you control that? I mean, this is people and their money. Like, no one's forcing you to put a bet down. I mean,
Yeah.
if some guy wants to put $1,000 for, the ninth player on an NBA bench to score 50, like, okay, that's his goal. Like, good luck, buddy. But like,
Yeah.
it's his money, it's his life. It's like, how much control over that do you really want? So, or do you really want
Hmm.
to enact? And you're just going to piss people off. So, I don't know. I honestly don't think that it's as much an issue or has the potency to be as much of an issue as like the NIL stuff and the college
Hmm.
and playing players. I think that is way more seismic in its ripple effect than gambling. Because for the most part, again, there are sponsorships and partnerships, but the teams aren't the ones controlling it. So the
Yeah.
schools aren't the ones controlling it. So I think any resources towards it, any reform towards it, I should say, is like, how do we make sure people don't get a debilitating, addiction
Yeah.
out of this? Like they're gonna, again, it's the same thing as like drinking. Like people are gonna do it and, it's gonna happen. It's like, all right, but what can we do as the state, as the team, athletes, whatever it may be to like make sure that people aren't losing themselves to it? So um, I think that's where a lot of if there's going to be any reform, any change, any new legislation or whatever, like that's where the attention's got to be is like, all right, it's here. Like it doesn't really affect the teams that much. Like
Yeah.
the teams aren't really affected by the betting line. They go out and play like they would. Maybe it gives them a little juice, a little extra motivation, but they're not, oh, we're 2 point underdogs. What the hell? Like, they're not drastically changing, but it's so much, again, compared to NIL and stuff, it's so much more on just the individual and the fan
Hmm.
to be like, how do we make sure that these people aren't losing it over betting, basically? So that's where I'm at. I think the bigger push, and I know we're running out of time, the bigger push will be because I kind of looked at it, but it didn't, I don't think it went through, is like, where do athletes and staffers fit into this whole
Hmm.
thing? Because I believe the rule now, and I might be again, there was some change, there was some legislature last year, but I don't even know if it went through. Um, I thought the rule was always you cannot bet on any, if you're an athlete or an employee of an athletic company, athletic group department, like you can't bet on any NCAA sponsored
Yeah.
sports.
I think so.
So if I wanted to go out and bet on horse racing, fine, because there's no NCAA horse racing.
Hmm.
Basketball, not fine because there's a basketball team. So I think a lot of the push for change and reform over the next few years might be athletes and staffers kind of trying to figure out, all right, how much can we really dip our toes in this? Like, is it just a blanket? Nope, none of it. Like, you can't do any NCAA sanctioned sports. Like, nope. Or, are we going to get to a point where you can, but not on your sport, not on your team? Um, I, I, I think that's going to be the more interesting storyline to watch.
Yeah. I mean, I think to be honest with you, and I mean, who knows at the the top levels, but I think there's just so many athletes out there that do it already.
Oh yeah.
And so it's like, I'm sure there are ways to find out if you're, the leagues, but I mean, unless it's like causing an issue, I don't think it's really something they have the capacity to determine. Like, you're not going to go to DraftKings if you're the NCAA and be like, I need a list of all of your people, that have an account with you. And if they're any of our student athletes, we're going to ban them from the sport or something like that. Like, that's just not realistic. So I don't really know that there's anything to actually prevent them from doing so. And I'm sure, as we both are aware, it hasn't in the past. So I don't know. It is interesting. And I think more broadly, like, yes, I think I'm in agreement with you on a lot of things. I think the only thing that gives me pause just from like the integrity of the game in the last couple of years is we've just seen kind of an alarming spike, I would say, of professional athletes being involved in, sort of schemes, even if it's not involved in their own sport. Like, they have violated the rules that their leagues have. And that's, yes, there are examples in the past, some very prominent examples, but it's the number of cases that's happened in the last couple of years is something that I think at the very least has to be monitored over the next couple of years, because I don't think people are wrong to be concerned about that. Not like, oh my God, the integrity of the sports are compromised, they're fixing the games, that sort of stuff. But like, I do think from an individual performance perspective, it is something that needs to at least be monitored. But I think other than that, we'll kind of see how it progresses over the next couple of years. But I do think it's definitely caused some changes, definitely in the last few years.
Yeah, and last thing I'll say, I mean, with the athlete stuff, like it depends on who's doing it too and where. I
Hmm.
mean, I didn't when I played at CUC, and like I being, right-handed God honest, like I didn't because I knew if I ever did, I would with my luck, I would get shafted for some reason. But like I know guys and other athletes who did, but they were a third stringer at Concordia University of Chicago. Like unless I went up to somebody and is like, here is blank and blanks,
Yeah.
here's their betting page, here's their transaction history, go
Hmm.
get them. They're not going to care. Um, now maybe if Cameron Boozer got rumored about it, yeah, that's a different story. So, or insert top tier college player for
Yeah.
that. So, it's so hard to track. I mean, yes, like you said, there are ways to do it. You can go to the company and be like, "Hey, I need this account's, username." I don't know if you need a warrant or what, but you can get it somehow. So, it's just how much your school is really on the lookout for it.
Hmm.
Is it one of those, if it starts becoming public knowledge, okay, now we'll take a look at it. Like it's going out on Twitter, we got to do something, guys. So I don't know. I think from the athlete perspective, it's going to be really interesting to watch because, like you said, a lot do, and I know a lot want to. Um,
Hmm.
they want to get in on it, and it's like, okay, well, again, is it just a flat no? Like if you're an athlete, you're done, you're out until you're not an
Hmm.
athlete anymore, or is it a okay, well, you can, but here are these restrictions. I don't know.
Hmm.
It's going to be. I'm interested to see where that goes. So. Alrighty. Well, I think that'll do it. So, talk about NIL and college money stuff, talk about gambling, fun times. So, we'll wrap it up there. We'll be back next week. Probably do another top five episode, I think, just because things were slow. Though I wouldn't mind talking about the NFL at some point, a little,
Hmm.
not preseason, but midsummer, midsummer to look at all the where everyone's at. So. But other than that, that'll do it. Bubba, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday night. Uh, everyone enjoy the rest of whatever day you're watching this on. And yeah, we'll see everyone next time.